So I'm Cynthia Jimes, and I work at ISKME, and we're located in Half Moon Bay, California. And we basically have two pieces to our organization. On the one hand, we have sort of our innovations team, and that team developed OER Commons, which you might be familiar with through funding from the Hewlett Foundation. And also the innovation team, it works with teachers to help to provide professional development opportunities so that teachers can use and share and collaborate around OER. So we have professional development workshops. And then the research team of ISKME is where I sit, and we study all of those activities. How are people engaging around OER on OER Commons? How is the professional development that the teachers are receiving about OER impacting their teaching and learning? We also have several studies globally on OER. It's all foundation-funded research. For example, we're working with Siavula in South Africa, which you might have heard of, trying to understand the role that communities of practice play in the creation and use of OER. We have done studies of teachers' domain in the U.S. and curricula in the U.S. and connections in the U.S. So primarily, our research agenda has kind of moved away from looking at how resources are created, the production of resources, to now we're primarily focusing on how is OER potentially aligned to new teaching and learning practices and new perceptions around teaching and learning. So what I wanted to talk about today was basically a single study, although it's part of a wider study, where we're looking at teacher professional development networks, and specifically teachers who are being trained on the use of OER. And these teachers that we are studying and work with also have access to technology, primarily in the form of a Ning, where they can collaborate and share their resources. They also have access to a wiki, and they also have access to an OER platform, OER Commons. And so over a 12-month period, we worked with over 100 teachers, provided them with professional development trainings in the form of workshops and ongoing support on sort of the concept of OER, how OER can be used, how it can be integrated into the classroom, how it can be used to support enhanced student learning. And so over that 12-month period, we also conducted workshop observations from a researcher perspective, and we did surveys and interviews with the participating teachers. And then we studied, one of the most interesting opportunities for this research, I think, was the ability to study the behaviors of these teachers as they collaborated on a Ning around OER. And this specific group of teachers were arts teachers, and this group of teachers had expressed feeling somewhat siloed from their schools because they weren't fully integrated due to budget cuts in schools. They weren't fully integrated into the school, so they sort of felt like they were on the edges. And that made them sort of a great group to really bring into an OER community. So some of the findings that have come out in a preliminary fashion for this research are that, of course, the participating teachers felt that by learning about OER and starting to use it, it provided for adaptable resources that they could then tailor to the local needs of their classrooms. Also, a couple of the teachers that we interviewed made statements about how learning about OER opened up their definitions of what curriculum materials are. And I remember one of the interview participants said, it allows for the creation of nimble resources that can then be used to impact school reform. So it was almost a shift in their conceptualization of resources that came through the data that we analyzed. Another finding that has bubbled up through the work is that by learning about OER, teachers perceive that, they become more interested in sharing their work. And so this is a quote from one of the teachers, Judy Shintani. She's a teaching artist, and she said that she became more interested in sharing her work after she learned about OER, and she started thinking about how there are less experienced teachers who need access to OER, and then there are more experienced who want to share their materials, and this was all set in the context in her mind of really providing rich things, rich materials to students. And she felt that OER opened up possibilities for that. So, in addition to the survey and the interview data, we also, as I said earlier, analyzed the Ning activities of these 136 teachers who were participating on a Ning. It was called an Arts Collab Ning, and they were all they had all been through the workshops and learned about OER, and the Ning was a place where they could start to share their resources and share teaching ideas. And when we broke down, we looked at their discussion postings, 162 discussion postings, and we categorized them into themes, and we saw that the majority of them, or the largest percentage, I should say, were around sharing of their own teaching and learning resources. 15% were around teaching challenges or teaching approaches. So not only were they sharing resources, they started to share challenges and approaches to specific dilemmas in the classroom. Here's an example of that. A teacher posted, she was teaching a theater course on Shakespeare, and I think her issue, if I were to read this, were specifically around how to inspire shy students to be more outgoing during the theater class. And so she posted something around this, and then she received 9 replies from this OER community. Some of them posted links to their own resources that would help her. You'll see that there's a Word doc that was attached in that first reply, and when I opened up that Word doc, I found that she had actually adapted that resource from another resource, but she had not stuck a Creative Commons license on it, but she was sharing it out. And then other respondents to this post, to this discussion thread, offered verbal. One of them offered a game that she had used. So it was sharing back resources and also just ideas around how they could help this particular teacher. Another finding that has come out of our early research is that OER is perceived to impact teacher collaboration. So from our interview data in particular, the participants indicated that, especially because they were artist teachers, and as I said, they felt sort of siloed, that this OER community allowed them to meet other teachers struggling with the same issues, and also not only within their discipline, but outside of their discipline. So this quote, one of the interview participants, the quote to the right, where she says, "I think it's broadened my community, if nothing else, of people I can pose questions to. It makes me feel more connected to people who are doing what I'm doing in other geographical areas and even across disciplines." Here's an example from the Ning, from the OER Ning, of a teacher who posted a collaborative activity. So this particular teacher wanted to create a piece of art and then email it to another teacher, and then that teacher would create a new piece of art inspired by the one that she or he had been emailed, and then it would go through this chain of creating new art materials that then she proposed they met face-to-face at the end of it all and discussed what they'd come up with. So it was a collaborative content creation project, which is what she was suggesting on the Ning. And also the survey and interview data that we analyzed revealed that several teachers view OER as a mechanism to spark new ideas. A couple of the participants specifically indicated that it increased their comfort level with technology, so it allowed them to integrate technology more into their classrooms. It also inspired them to use the internet to search for resources because of an awareness of that possibility. I think this quote is also pretty insightful because she says that using OER has begun to affect my teaching in the sense that I've expanded a sense of what lessons can do. And the question on the survey that prompted this response was, has OER impacted your teaching and learning in any way, and if so, how? So, beyond this study that I just went through, which, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned was funded by the Ford Foundation, we have other studies, another one funded by Hewlett, which is also looking at teacher professional development networks and really how those networks and how the use of OER can impact teaching and learning. We've also done, as I mentioned, a study. We're working with Siavula to look at communities of practice around OER, specifically on the Connections platform. And this is a group of teachers primarily in the Western Cape in South Africa. And the image here is of an interview I did. I was able to go to the Cape Town area last November and interview teachers who had been using OER through the Connections platform. And this teacher was just fantastic. She was so excited. She taught small children how to read, and she had the most adorable library with little stuffed animals everywhere and big colorful murals on the back of her walls, as you can see one of the murals there. And she was very excited about OER and what it could do, because she felt she had this approach to teaching literacy and she wanted to share it out, and she wanted to form a work group on Connections in order to do that. And she also had all of these teaching materials that she wanted to share. So she saw it as a way to share her own knowledge and also build on that knowledge. And other teachers I interviewed while in Cape Town said similar things. One of them felt like OER provided an opportunity to put his materials up to the scrutiny of the entire world, so that then he could get feedback on them and he could continually improve them. So it was a continuous improvement mechanism. We also are working with the Community College Open Textbook Project, which emerged out of Foothill De Anza College in California, but it's a national project now to engage community colleges in the adoption and use of open textbooks. And they started with one proprietary textbook and transitioned it to an open textbook, and then they enlisted faculty and students to test out the use of that textbook. And it's been a really interesting project. We're working through the data right now, but one of the more fun findings, I think, is that there is a professor who said that in the interview that it's opened up a new possibilities in the classroom, because through the interactivity of the materials that he's working with, because the open textbook is of course interactive, he then brings that into the classroom. The students become more interactive with the material. Then they sort of go off on this self-directed learning path where they click through and they link to other sites. And so in a sense, he said that by using OER, it took a new direction in the classroom, so that the students were more sort of the leaders of the content that they were following in their path of learning. So all of this to us at ISKME, it's pointing to the need for further research that does examine the role of OER in teaching and learning. Specifically, we'd like to focus more on how OER is impacting at the student level. And then also, specifically out of our CCO, Community College Open Textbook Project, we'd like to further examine how OER can be embedded into existing institutional processes. So, might have ended a little early, but...
Okay, well, we never complain about early because that means there's more time for it.
Yeah.
It's long, that's a problem. So Here we go.
Could I ask how you suggest you can investigate how OER impacts on the student?
Yes. So that's a great question. And some of the approaches that we've begun to take are to, for one, collect data from the teachers on the perceived improvements in learning. And part of that is sometimes about teachers developing data collection models of their own. So they might develop a template that helps them collect student observation data in their classrooms, for example, after they've used an OER lesson. And so it could be very much about teacher self-collected data. If you have an opportunity to do something more longitudinal, then you can look at grade changes over time from courses that didn't use OER to courses that did. We actually, in our community college open textbook project, we conducted focus groups and interviews with students directly to understand. We tailored our questions more toward how is use of this open textbook impacting your study habits? How is it impacting your interactions with your peers and what you learn from your peers? So direct data collection from the student is also a possibility.
Yeah, and then there are a lot of nuances to that question, too, I think that we appreciate, but another one here.
You mentioned in the study that that the use and remixing and creation of OERs fosters changes in the pedagogy that the teachers deploy. What kind of pedagogy is that OERs drive?
So in one of the examples that keeps coming up is the the interactivity of the resources and how that inspires and opens up possibilities for interactivity within the classroom and also more peer-based learning models. So that is one area. There was one other one I was going to mention. I just lost it.
But if I can follow up, is that interactivity because it's open, or is it because it's online, or is it because it's designed to be interactive?
It's in these cases they were open online and designed to be more interactive. So, yeah.
So it may not have been just a function of being
Right.
open,
Yes,
contributed to.
that's very true.
There's three questions I have. One is a spin-off of the pedagogy question, and I'm wondering whether, in looking at the whole pattern of your studies, if you found that there's some disciplines that are more geared to more open pedagogies than others, i.e. arts and social sciences perhaps, are more geared towards peer participation, peer learning than mathematics. And I can cite a specific study that proved the opposite for mathematics, for example. The second question is whether if this positive attitude towards OER use and changing attitudes amongst faculty and students is something that is sustainable, or is it something because you're conducting the research now, or that there is a focus or a sort of attention within a community, they're influenced by this, and whether longitudinal studies are required within the same community or across, comparative studies to see the long-term effects of this in changing attitudes. And this connects to something else that comes up in the research field. Many teachers and faculty have expressed concerns about accreditation, about confidence, using the resources and sharing the materials, about time constraints, whether it's really important to be embedded in professional development, if only if they get accreditation from their institutions. Otherwise, sometimes it's an add-on that they
Right.
see as a burden, and sometimes whether if an external community goes and sort of imposes this attitude towards them, they see it as a coerced, if you like, randomly and they don't know, and it adds an extra stress
Right.
factor if it's not embedded within institutional systems that are geared towards promoting them for having such attitudes. So, sorry, it's a bit of a statement, not a question. Several layers.
You gonna leave me alone on this one, David? No, this is great. I got it. So I'll probably work backwards here. I think that all of the questions you asked are really interesting, and we're starting to see lenses of that in the research and places where we can dig further into them. You asked if there were, your first question was around specific disciplines and whether there are differences, and we're just starting to look at that. The arts project was a really great opportunity to do that because you have a group of teachers working in arts, and how does working with OER, is it different for them than it would be for a math teacher? And some of the things that we started to see with this group was that they felt that they had a creative basis, so they were already by nature creators. And so we actually asked them questions about, do you think art lends itself to OER and vice versa? And so that was one of their answers. Also, the fact that they felt more siloed drew them to OER more than maybe other disciplines within schools that are fully integrated. So those were a couple of findings that we will explore further. The other question, now I've lost it.
The longitudinal effects.
Oh, right. Yes, whether this is something that they're doing just now because they're participating. Well, we've actually found that through the interviews that it's a strong message has come out from the participants that they feel they've adapted a new way of thinking and a new perception around resources, around collaboration. And this gets back to your question about how it's impacted pedagogy, because we found that teachers, for example, with the Community College Open Textbook Project, they were inspired to start collaborating a little bit more because of the collaborative nature of OER. And then the next semester, when they were no longer tied to that project, they approached their curriculum design within their department from a more collaborative perspective. So it's kind of, we're starting to see evidence that it's sort of infiltrating into other practices.
And the last one was about challenges.
Can you explain what you...
Time constraints, whether they find this burden.
Yes. So on our survey, we always ask what would enable you to participate more fully in OER. More time, more support from your principal, and more training opportunities, and more time always comes up at the top. But some things that also come up at the top are more professional development opportunities, more opportunities, and encouragement to participate in those opportunities on behalf of their school leaders.
Okay, that's all the time we have. So, please.